I think your point is that, apps have, this vertical integration, right, with more than just the user surface of the application and going through its logic and going into data implications. And the fact that making a change in design can imply changes downstream, right, and necessitate changes that need to happen further down the stack. And then and there's another aspect too, which is that apps, unlike say issues of pure design, are dynamic on the front end, which means the whole way that we think about the layout, the front end is actually driven by the back end, because usually what we're looking at is data that's being generated by whatever came from the rear, and this can show up in something as something as simple as a list can have significant impacts in terms of driving the way that the things are going to be laid out at the front, and all your design opinions in the world might not matter when they run into the reality of the data. And so like there's this need to sort of go back and forth with
Mm.
among the elements in the stack in order to figure out what real truth is going to look like. And so having these things be too siloed off, right, means that you lose that integrated view and ability to move smoothly among these. But at the same time, we've seen like when you try to do the all-in-one app, you either have to lose power or significantly increase opinion, right, about how things can be worked up and down, and that and both of those have significant sacrifices to them. And so I mean, these are just challenges are, I think, intrinsic to like the build applications are trying to accelerate, each part of the process. That the more you increase power, the more you're specializing in this one piece of the app, which means you are losing focus on the rest of the app. And the more you try to create, the more the integrated, the all-in-one, the more you sort of, take the sharp edges off the other parts. That can be where some of the most extraordinary value is. Like I've been doing some development recently. I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the sharpest end of each of these different systems that I'm working with, like mobile app working with augmented reality, right? AR, something you can't do on any other platform than the phone, basically,
Yeah.
right? Some exceptions like Vision Pro or whatever, but but like, okay, what does that permit that couldn't be done elsewhere? And that is, and we start to find a lot more or value, right? Because the AI allows us to develop for those environments really, really fast, but at the same time, it's more spiky. So how do we make something easy and simultaneously be able to capture those spikes in value? Is I think sort of the bigger problem that we're all dealing with here. And Claude Design, which is I think right as of this recording, something like 100 hours old, right? So it has been out very long. It's very early days. Um, is I think to say a case study in like trying to move the ball on resolving more of these trade-offs, and that's just a hard thing to do. How do you make it better at design while simultaneously also making it easy to integrate with the back end, right, to be able to have your downstream implicate downstream the implications of design on how data is structured, also being able to deal with dynamic data, also being able to be the best possible interface for the platform that you're actually targeting. And the trying and I think that's the holy grail, trying to get to all of those things at the same time, which all these tools are going to do imperfectly. But I think we might sort of have what we should be looking for is how do these tools advance that state of the art, and how does it do so, and in terms of which we choose to use the ones that are doing the right kind of job in terms of where the developer, where the team's expertise is, right? Either being a robot or a bicycle. So that's kind of how I
Th-
think about like which things you want to hand off, which things you want to keep, and then like what does this mean for for the rest of the system, and decreasing your aggregate cost of development across all these different pieces of the spectrum. Um, and also, one thing that the JC said before that I thought was really interesting is this idea of like, okay, what are you gonna be able to rely on? What are you gonna be able to standardize on? And the answer is not a one of these, because this thing is 100 hours old. What do we think it's going to be like in another 100 hours? What do we think it's going to be like in another 10 days? And then what happens when like our friends at OpenAI, who, got their first ChatGPT apps, come out with their own answer on this? what's that going to look
So,
like? I think like the depreciation schedule, right, for initiatives based on any of these tools is going to be very, very short.
and this kind of comes down to one of the things I've been thinking about, which is that I mean, the only constant in all of this is change, right? And it's a classic line that this is just everything's moving very quickly. And how do you kind of build on, or how do you build for an environment of significant change? And the way that I see it at the moment, because obviously it could change again, but is a back our old friend MCP. I mean, it's the one thing that's going to be standard in amongst all of this that nearly all of these tools will operate with. And that so that, if you're aiming to build in an environment where MCP is a consistent, or at least the standard, there is a standard that does that, working with that will mean that, I can build something that works in MCP, and I know that whatever that Claude comes up with is going to be going into the context which should be available to the MCP. So I can then leverage that and make sure that I can then handle what most of the things that any of the tools throughout us. Because if it works with Claude and MCP, it will work with OpenAI and MCP. So if OpenAI come up with something interesting in MCP, I go, okay, fine, I'll just do that. It will be thrown into the context, and I'll then leave it out the context, going to the next thing. And I think this is kind of where all this is going to, well, at least at the moment, it seems to be the way that is the best target to aim for, because you're going to be able to just handle pretty much what anyone throws at you. Um, the challenge, obviously, is when you start doing, when you start having things outside the context, like Claude Design, which is effectively a separate conversation that doesn't play in. Although I guess the MCP is still available within that, so even that should be able to work. So I think that's my current thinking about this. But obviously, then you've got to think you're obviously limited within what MCP can offer in terms of connecting to these remote systems.
Yeah, I think it shouldn't be a hard thing to crack. Just connecting. So just in Claude, for example, connecting Claude Design, Claude Cowork, and Claude Code all together, so they really work well and they are synced for the different phases that you might be in. That you're according to your team's expertise or your own expertise. I think. Well, if I think about MCP, that could be that connector right there, right? Like allows you to work only within Claude. That is already something that is, I think, at a hand's reach. And then, of course, I think we're just seeing these isolated tools that, yeah, work in isolation, and then you have to figure out like the best way to work according to the project. Like, I mean, now I'm all about Claude, but I used to be like using ChatGPT to kind of scaffold things and ideate, and then hand over to any IDE or tools like Lovable when it was like the hot thing. Or so now I think these bigger players like Claude or well, like I guess like, yeah, Claude and ChatGPT are the best ones right now to really centralize everything in their internal tools. Like Claude, I think is slowly becoming the only place you need to be. And if they really crack the interconnectivity between their own tools, like I think that is really the only place you need to be, because it's you will have the best design pal, the best coding pal, and the best business pal or whatever you need, and that would then along with MCP to access any other connectors, that would be just a game changer, I think.
The one thing that we need to be careful of, though, right, is that effectively, I mean, all these things like Claude Code, Claude Work, Claude Code, and Claude Design, they're just different harnesses over the model, right? I mean, they're just
Hmm.
supplying different context, different tools, but they're not really doing anything. They're just on top of the actual underlying model. So, I mean, ultimately, you could have OpenAI replicating all the functionality Claude does, just using their model. And in fact, I'm sure we'll see in the same way that there's been open code which replicates Claude code. there's going to be open versions of most of these harnesses and tools that can work on any model. So you're not relying on one particular thing. And ultimately, it's going to be, the choice of model. I think for me, the thing that drives it a lot at the moment, I mean, that's so really fair. Claude, we've got Anthropic have done some fantastic harnesses, and these things are actually very clever in how they work. But the core of them, of the harnesses, can be replicated relatively easily. It's the model that really differentiates them. And I would say, for the most part, the Claude's model has been the one that most of the sort of B2B companies have liked because it's generally people like it for the coding side, and some of the integrations and the tools they built have been pretty clever. But I expect my expectation is OpenAI is going to have a pretty good model coming pretty soon, as they tend to do relatively rapidly, and will have some way of coming back on some of these things. So I think we'll see more competition. At the moment, Claude has definitely got the mind share, and I also had the other day that Google have got a bit of a internal issue. I don't know if you saw the tweets, but apparently there's a lot of the story I heard was that all the people in DeepMind only want to use Claude and hate using Google because it's not very good. And they've been told they're not allowed to. And there's been a lot of back and forth about this, and there's some interesting challenges there. So they've got to do a bit of catching up to do, I think. But I mean, I think what feels like is going to happen is we're going to see, these harnesses becoming a bit more. I think that we see these harnesses becoming either a bit more open or a bit more consistent, and then you'll have the choice of the model that then drives them all. And really, at the moment, a lot of this has been, a lot of the focus on OpenAI and Claude is because the subscriptions give you this huge uplift in tokens, which you can't really ignore. I mean, I keep saying this to people, you get 5 to 10 times more tokens by having a subscription than buying them with an API, which is a
Mm-hmm.
huge benefit.
Yep.
And I think it's distorting the market a little bit. And I think the whole idea is they're trying to do the crack selling routine of getting you addicted before they start raising the prices. So when that finally kicks in, because the story you keep hearing is that the current processing we're doing is economically unjustifiable. You can't really sustain this. We're getting a lot of stuff that you wouldn't normally get in there if we were actually they're trying to make a profit on it.
Which is, I'm not sure that's true in terms of marginal cost. I think a lot of it is, going right back into their, investment. Like one of the reasons I sort of talk about, JC and his time and his productivity is I'm pretty sure that is easily 10 to 100x over whatever the token considerations are. I think that there's a little bit of, oh, well, tokens are gonna, they
Okay.
cost energy, they cost the environment. Yes. If you want to invest in AI today, buy Exxon, because it's the energy companies, right? Because what are you
Yeah.
really paying for when you're paying for a token? You're paying for compute. Compute is being driven off of a chip that's on a depreciation schedule, so more chips need to be bought, right? GPUs mostly, and right now the leading GPU vendor is NVIDIA, and NVIDIA is the most valuable company in the world right now because of it. Although they won't always be the only one that you run these things on. That has a lot to do with CUDA, right? And a piece of software that makes it unusually easy
Yep.
to
Yep. Yep.
use
Yep.
NVIDIA. It's not because they're uniquely more powerful. There are other manufacturers. AMD comes to mind in the US and plenty of Chinese manufacturers. They're doing this. One of the secrets, like some of the Chinese models, is that they run on non-NVIDIA machines, right? And that's
Mm.
why they can drive down those costs is because they have access to cheaper silicon, and also access to cheaper energy because of how horribly corrupt the energy market is in China. But the but I think and I bring up those fundamentals because I think you're making a really important point, Toby, which is we have not yet determined how important the harness is, right, versus the model. And the people talk about, oh, codex is great, or oh, the Claude design is great and it's killer. And of course that's a good way to get like engagement on Twitter, is to go write a post about like the latest thing that came out, or great for like a podcast to be talking about something that came out 100 hours ago. But the I think there's a bit of bitter lesson to this, right? That I think your instinct is right, that it's the model that really drives the bus, and that these harnesses are insanely cheap to produce compared to the cost of either producing or and the variable
Yeah.
cost of actually running the model. So if the mo and like this gets to like they want to use Claude. Why do they want to use Claude? Is it because Claude code's code is so good? No. Claude's code is if they had a leak on it, and if you actually look at the code, it's like okay, it's good. It has some good ideas to it, but it's a bit sloppy, like most code is out there, right? There's nothing magical to it. The most magical thing about Claude Code is what you just said, Toby, which is it gets cheaper access to those tokens. And as the state of the art keeps moving forward, the cost of like a Opus 4.7 class model is going to fall by a lot as we're all demanding what an Opus 5.0 model looks like, because what we want is better and better and better. And then the question becomes, can the energy intensity of it decrease? Can the cost of energy itself decrease just through getting more solar or nuke or whatever, into the mix? And can we get cheaper chips, right? Those are things that can drive those economics. But all of those are about the economics of the model versus the economics of the harness. And the terrible thing for people who make software, and particularly people who are making tools, is that the cost of making the tools may be becoming trivial, just like the cost of the things we're building with the tools in the face of the models themselves. And when that starts to happen, what does that mean, right, for what is still valuable in the market? And like I look at JC and I think, okay, this is awesome for JC because it's a big multiplier on his taste as a designer, right? Because now you get like all the lever in the world on this, right? Your
Yeah.
JC as a producer, right, of software goes perhaps down. Like your ability to produce a design into an application becomes less important, but your initial taste on like what makes good experience, that actually becomes more valuable because that is something that can then be fed into and get a lot of leverage in the model. Just like the best car designers in the world can be super super highly compensated as we increasingly roboticize car manufacturing, right? Because now whatever the best design is can get a lot of leverage on it, and the 10th best design, who cares? Because everybody can just use the best design.
Yeah.
And that sort of focuses us on like how do you actually get the best in the world to be working with that, and like the leverage is coming from the model. So right now, Claude's the main character. People are excited about the next thing, Claude Code, Claude Design, whatever. But if DeepMind gets crap together, right? And we've seen good stuff come out of Gemini 3.1, right? So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Gemini 4, blows the socks off of Claude Code or Claude, right, for, major jobs people want to do. It'll become the main character, and people will be talking about how its harnesses are so uniquely good. And hey, look at these wonderful decisions they made. But it's really about the underlying model.
I think, I mean, I fully agree. I do think there's a point to be made about the harness side of things because cloud design is that, right? Like it's about that harness or about the wrapper that it is the way it's presented to you, so that gets you excited, right? Like you
Yeah.
can do this, you can build these design systems, you can preview things in this way, you can connect with everything. So the model, of course, is the driver, um, but I think there's something to say about the how they present these models. So the same way with Cloud Code, like the way they presented Cloud Code is like just this really powerful tool that allows you to basically connect to your terminal and just write code from simple ideas and just do pretty much anything you want. And and the same with Cloud Cowork. Like they just market or they just wrap these models in really usable and intuitive um, harnesses that people get excited about and that people know how to use easily. So I think it's probably going to be about that because to me, for example, as a non that technical designer or builder, Codex has never been accessible. So it has never been as, let's say, appealing as Cloud Code, for example.
Oh, interesting.
Um, yeah, so that only just in my case that
Mhm.
is already something that made me go default to Claude Cowork or
What
Code, but
respect? What was the respect to why wasn't it appealing as codex? Just the
um,
application itself.
yeah, I think if I had to pinpoint, I guess it would be around the UI, um, or the
Interesting.
UX. Maybe for you too, it would be like just what you would expect from, yeah, like this CLI, and
Hmm.
but for me, it presented like a barrier that Claude didn't present. So now, as I get more familiar or more comfortable with code in general, that is not true anymore. But I think these tools, they want to get builders, which come from different backgrounds, into using the tool. So the way they present the model is extremely important. Um,
It is interesting, right? Because I mean, all these tools, I mean, they're just all these harnesses, code, covert code. Effectively, it's just extra context and tools. That's all it is, right? There's nothing clever about it beyond the actual model itself. It's just the way that they put them together. That just builds on what the model is. What the model is. So yeah, I mean, but it's interesting to see how, even though some of the benchmarks might say one tool is better than another, the harnesses are actually making a difference in what people choose. Some of the benchmarks say that some of the models that Google have are really good, but because it doesn't have a good harness or a harness as good as Claude, that it's not getting the mind share that the Claude has got. So yeah, I mean it's basically packaging effectively. It's all saying,
yeah.
right? You might have a better product, but if it doesn't get it to them, if it's not packaged in the right way, it's not going to be it's used by the users. It's interesting. One thing I did actually see was interesting in slight aside in the Google I/O day, which is in May. They've actually got the founders of the MCP app standard speaking. So we might actually see Google talking about some MCP app stuff, which has been one of the key pieces missing that we haven't seen just yet. Um,
In Gemini,
I
yeah.
don't know what they're going to announce. Yeah, in the Gemini app. I'm hoping it'll be in the Gemini app because it will then really open up MCP app as a standard.
Hmm.
Because that's the one thing we haven't really seen. It hasn't really taken off as much as I think it could do. Obviously, there's some things it needs to get better at, but having Google in play I think, would maybe make a difference.
The a thought that's been percolating in my mind over the course of the last couple of weeks. I talked to a my cousin who's an animator. He does 3D animation work. He was talking about VR, and he was saying that when he was doing his meetings like with Meta, Facebook, they were really excited about getting him to make things for VR. And he sort of took the meeting. He was listening, like, okay, well, they seem to want it, but I don't see a demand for it in the market. But so what he really wanted to do was to make videos using tools in VR, because VR would allow him to more directly, interact right with the 3D models
Oh,
and things he's looking to
interesting.
do. And so his observation was that what they want to do is sell it at the consumer side, but there's actually much more of a sale for, say, VR in terms of being able to get work done on the business side, which is being under addressed because that's just not the direction of the money flow and not the direction of the attention. When we think about MCP apps, we think about these other tools. We just had a whole session here where we're talking about harnesses, we're talking about Claude Design, which is obviously more B2B or prosumer at best, right, as opposed to be a consumer app.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the big advantages of AI is the way it allows us to, get, work done and express our intent with a lot less friction, right? So like the probably the biggest MCP apps piece of news in the course of the last 60 days was Microsoft Copilot, right? Introducing the
Yeah.
support for MCP apps. And now we're talking about like Gemini or what have you. But I think something that might be worth us giving some consideration to is like, is it that this thing hasn't really taken off, or is it kind of like VR in that it's a push for a consumer application when in fact the business application is staring us in the face and just not getting the same kind of attention because it's not quite as sexy for the top line trades to be talking about, but it's where there's a lot of money to be made, a lot of value to be created. Because, there's so much that we can do that can increase our output and increase our, creativity and be able to bring value into the world. And that what like MCP UI does, like these other interfaces, is remove the barrier between us and our aspirations.
Definitely. For
I,
me,
I'd take that, Jesse.
sorry, I was gonna say that what you just said clicked because to me the representation of that today is what we also discussed briefly in a previous video, ChatGPT apps versus Claude connectors. Like they are the MCP apps that we keep talking about, but they are presented in way different ways, in many different ways because they are aiming. So Claude, it seems to be aiming at a more internal or um, uh, company oriented people, and then ChatGPT apps is more of this consumer, this sexy kind of surface that is easier to talk about, right? And I mean, just wanted to say that that to me is a representation of what Ray was saying. And definitely, just to add to that, something that I also found myself surprised about the other day when I was using Cloud Cowork is that um, it was able to generate some UI on the fly to present to me ideas that around just basically setting up a backend. So it was able to present to me that in the same way the Excalibur ChatGPT app does that, which is something that we also reviewed in a video. So I think that starts to unlock the MCP connectors or whatever they call it next in Claude or any other more of a builder tool. Yeah, it will be very interesting to see how that will work in that environment as opposed to these sexy consumer facing apps, right? Like GPT apps. Sorry, Toby, you were going to say something?
Well, I know Ray probably has to go, but I just want to say one brief thing. I think maybe I think Ray's probably right actually in that where we are seeing traction is in the enterprise in MCP apps. As I was listening to Sam Morrow, who does the GitHub MCP server, and what he was basically saying is that the enterprise seems to be really interested in MCP because it allows them to control the interface between the users and the models and what tools they have access to, and they do very fine-grained control on, okay, you can have access to this tool using this permission, and that sort of side of things is hugely valuable for the enterprise. Whereas if they're looking for like skills that have to be downloaded from GitHub, they've got no control over, or they're looking for, CLIs have to be installed. It's much harder for them to get that kind of granularity of control. Whereas, with the tools that they provide through MCP, you're able to say very clearly, who has access to what. You can start to have an audit trail. So it really helps you to be able to be in the middle of that interface between the users and the models, which is hugely important for the security and sort of and accounting and a whole bunch of things. So I think that's really where it's a very unsexy thing because it's boring, but it's incredibly valuable and important. And I think that's probably where, ultimately, or at least at the moment, the MCP is getting a lot of interest. And we probably haven't really seen that come out yet in this sort of consumer side, but it's definitely a super valuable one. And I think there's a lot more to be said around this in terms of these sort of B2B apps using MCP. And so yeah, I think it's not going away. It's going to be important, but I think maybe as Ray said, we've been looking in the wrong place for now until it changes.
Well, that's why we keep on meeting because it keeps on changing. We keep on tracking the changes. Look,
Thanks, guys.
See you in the
Talk to you
next one.
soon.